Old Father Longlegs can't say his prayers? Take him by the left leg and throw him down the stairs. And when he's at the bottom, before he long has lain, take him by the right leg and throw him up again. Nursery Rhyme, Part 1. It's been about 3 months after my experience. Since that dreadful day, nightmares festered my dreams, depriving me of sleep. My life is gradually getting back into order, but I still feel that I am forever tainted. My town was strictly religious, so you'd have difficulty hearing stories about supernatural phenomenon like ghosts, demons, and the like. I lived with a roommate at an apartment. Every night at 3 a.m. I would take a nightly jog for exercise. It was always a pleasure of feeling the chill of the cold air on my skin when I ran. That all changed one night. I left the apartment as usual and I began my jog. I raced down the pavement and stopped at the stop sign. As I began my sprint back, I stopped suddenly when I heard a low hum. I looked around for the sight of the odd humming and followed the path to a dark alley. The humming became louder. Listening closely to the humming, I realized it was of a nursery rhyme. There were 2 disembodied voices singing in unison. They were of 2 children, both boys. The light from my cell phone illuminated the dark alley, revealing the 2 boys skipping around. I have seen several children at the apartment, and I knew them all off the top of my head, but these 2 kids I failed to recognize. They wore outdated clothing. The patchwork of the clothing was mix-matched and varied in coloration. They were both roughly around 10 years old, but their clothes were far too large for their frames. They must have felt my glare because they suddenly ceased their humming and skipping. Without a word, the 2 boys dropped their heads, at first from apparent embarrassment, or so I had thought. The tension was suffocating. I decided to talk to them so as to break the ice, as one would say. "What are you 2 boys doing out here this late?" I said. "Where are your parents?" They didn't respond. I further pushed them to explain their reasons for playing outside at 3, mentioning how it was especially dangerous for people their age. Instead, they remained glued there, still as stone statues. Finally, I asked them if they felt okay. It was then that the once static children reanimated. Their movements were awkward and robotic. I looked more closely at their physical features. Their skin was pale and chalky, whiter than the raggedy clothes they were wearing. One had brown hair while the other had light blonde hair. For simplicity's sake, I'll call them Blondie and Brunette. "Hey there, mister," Brunette said. He spoke in a bizarrely monotonous tone. It was unnerving, to say the least. "Why are you and your friend out here so late?" I asked again. "Take us to your apartment," Brunette answered, completely ignoring my inquiry. It was an odd request. I had just met these 2 boys, and yet he spoke as if we knew each other for years. Blondie didn't respond and merely stood by Brunette. Brunette had a flare of confidence to him that was admirable but disturbing. His toothy smirk didn't help matters. "Are your parents there, boy?" He ignored me once again. "Just take us with you. It won't be that long. We'll go to your apartment and we'll be gone." I was becoming more distraught at his assertiveness. "No, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to. I feel threatened." Brunette's smirk transformed into a scowl with his movements stiffening. Blondie stared at Brunette, then at me. It was then that I saw what they were hiding. They both had solid, coal-black eyes. There was no sign of whiteness of the sclera in their eyes. The light from my phone reflected on their eyes, showing off a hollow appearance. Apparently, looking directly at their eyes was enough to enrage Brunette. "Just let us go with you," he said. He repeated the same demand over and over. He attempted to speak in a reassuring manner that he and his friend were unarmed and that they were just kids. Blondie remained silent during the whole tirade. If I wasn't completely overlooking it, Blondie appeared to be terrified of Brunette's bouts of anger. I'm a grown man. I've seen things that don't even faze me anymore. I've seen old, frail men get robbed on the streets, hit and runs, accidents, and yet these 2 boys, if they even were boys, were sending me up the wall and getting under my skin. Worse, that little Brunette. I sensed he understood fully that he was making me uncomfortable and was relishing at the fact. I kept staring hypnotically into the endless void that was his eyes, those dark, mysterious pools that lacked all light. I'm warning you, boys, I said. One more step and... That little brown-haired freak grabbed my arm. It wasn't a firm grip, but the boy nevertheless had some strength in it. His touch was cold, deathly cold. Then the itchiness started. My arm felt as if it had caught on fire and was burning underneath Brunette's grasp. Blondie stood by with a befuddled daze. "Let go, boy," I managed to scream out. He shook his head and pressed his fingers further down on my arm. The pain seared through my body. My strength was flowing out of my body. This boy, nay, creature, hungrily stared at me. His skin also transformed. His olive-colored tone took on a lively appearance. Enough was enough. While I would never do this to a child, I knew on a subconscious level that this was no child, just a crude parody of one. I gathered up enough force in my fist and slammed it into Brunette's face. He fell backward, but Blondie caught him. He glared at me with that same deathly expression. It felt like hours until he gathered himself and walked away with Blondie. Freed from his hold, I hesitatingly stared at the path that the two children took, but to my relief, they were gone. I wasted no time to understand why they had suddenly vanished, nor did I remotely care to know. I raced back to my apartment after repeatedly looking behind my back to ensure that they weren't following me. My roommate stirred awake from me slamming the door. "Dude, what's all the noise about?" I was breathing heavily, nearly collapsing from my shortness of breath. "Sorry, man. Just got into a little trouble while out on my jog." His eyes shot open at that. "Trouble? Are you okay?" I nodded my head. "Don't worry. It was nothing, really." He shrugged his shoulders and resumed his sleeping. When I got into my bed, I noticed his pet dog Buster sleeping next to his bed. He was an old pug whose hind legs were broken in a vehicular accident. As I was nearing sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That fire was still active in my body. I found myself catching what I assumed were glimpses of Brunette staring at me with his heated glare. His rage invaded my dreams, as my dreams were primarily about him repeatedly demanding entry into my apartment room. Part 2. One dream felt the most real. My eyes were heavy from a day's worth of work. As I was nearing sleep, I smelled a putrid scent fill my nostrils. I can best compare it to the smell of months-old diapers burnt to a crisp with sulfuric acid. When forcing myself awake, I saw him. There, at the edge of my bed, was Brunette. He wordlessly stood there as a statue before walking towards me, stopping at my face. He bent down at the side of my bed, his amusement never ending. He tentatively tapped my forehead with his lifeless fingers. His fingers were clawing into my forehead before I was immediately woken up by my roommate screaming. "What's wrong?" I asked. He was desperately looking around the room under his bed and in the bathroom. He was always cool and collected, but now he was acting in utter lunacy. He grabbed me by the shirt collar and pulled me to his face. "Buster's missing." I was slow to react because he was still being illogical. Maybe he walked out of the door last night? My roommate fumed. Not in his condition, he wouldn't. We agreed to pitch in some money to make missing posters featuring the elderly canine, and we spread them around the block. He also talked me into combining the money he had with mine to promise anyone who found the dog a reward for their cooperation. Some greedy con artists did try to pass off any dog as being my friends, but we turned them down without issue. That wasn't the only odd circumstances that transpired. When I returned home after work, I found my roommate sprawled on the ground. I called for an ambulance as he was going into throes. Somehow, my roommate had developed a curious illness with some traces of the common cold and high fever. Besides that, the exact ailment was unknown. It was unfortunate to see a man like my roommate become stricken overnight by illness because of how better off he was, but here he was. He screamed miserably from his suffering and remained that way for weeks. His body mass melted away until he got into a coughing fit and succumbed shortly after. After my roommate's funeral, notes began to appear in my room. They were written on paper that I never had in my room before, and I was quite certain that my roommate also didn't use it. The first note was deplorable. "I have been watching you for a good while from afar. That moment I touched you, I sensed that there was something special about you." It was from Brunette, of course. On the back of the note was an arrow pointing in a straight path towards my door. It felt as though Brunette was beckoning me to follow it. I tried to fight that urge, but the note was an extension of Brunette, and it had that same hypnotic feel to it. I walked outside of my door only to see more notes on the ground. They too were a series of arrows pointing straight. I picked each one up and walked down the path. Some of my neighbors saw me collecting the notes but didn't say anything on them, let alone if they were the ones who wrote them down. Eventually, I made my way to the laundry room downstairs. To my horror, Buster was pinned to the wall, his hind legs bent so far they were barely held together by their joints. A vertical cut was made along with a horizontal one. They were crudely held back by nails. His lungs, heart, and other body parts were exposed. The dog had a look of fear on his face. As I tried to regain composure, I found a note on one of the table's flat surfaces. It read, "I have played with Doggy and the big man. Now I want to play with you." My suspicions were proven to be true. Brunette, that black-eyed boy, was responsible for Buster's disappearance and the sudden illness and demise of his friend. But what was I to do about it? It's not like I could advise the police that there was some supernatural demon masquerading as a kid and killed my best friend and his dog. My nightmares worsened the more I felt that Brunette and Blondie were staring at me. My sanity was being tested daily. I had since ceased my nightly jog because of my fear of seeing those two boys again. I was developing insomnia from my severe lack of sleep because every time I closed my eyes, I could only see Brunettes staring back at me. It all reached its boiling point one day when I was fired from my job for coming in late because of my insomnia. Going to the store or out with my friends was out of the question because I almost swore I heard the two black-eyed boys resuming their humming of that nursery rhyme. Despite me remaining at home nearly 24/7, a series of accidents started to occur in the apartment. More of my neighbors reported on strings of bad luck. A window washer fell 2 stories to his death when his rope broke under mysterious circumstances. More pets were disappearing from the building. It started with my elderly neighbor Melissa, and how one day her pet Persian cat vanished from her apartment room. Brunette would leave me notes showing where he had placed the mutilated bodies of the pets, some found at the back of the building, others in the owner's office. The sickness that took my roommate's life also began manifesting throughout the building, with no possible cure being achievable. It first appeared in the elderly residents, starting with Melissa, and gradually 5 elderly residents succumbed to the disease with high fevers that were incapable of being lowered. But then the Beck sickness, as I called it, was transferred to the children of the apartment. The worst case involved a young single mother whose infant son contracted it, and despite her enlisting doctors to help her son, he faded away the next day. I received more notes from Brunette each day about the various people he had played with. He was a busy boy because I raked up 30 notes detailing his many endeavors. It became clear to me that I was cursed by Brunette because of my incessant refusal to fall to his commands, and my curse was bringing bad luck to my neighbors. If I didn't do anything immediately, I was afraid that Brunette's influence would then transfer over to my family. I did not know if I could live with myself if something happened to my nieces or nephews or my aging parents. The most disgusting message I received from Brunette, however, was regarding Blondie's fate. When I managed to leave my apartment room to buy groceries, Brunette left a note on my floor mat simply saying, "Look inside your cupboard." I did what the boy ordered and was given the shock of my life. Inside was Blondie's head, bloody and still. Those black eyes still unnerved me greatly, but that was mostly because they were truly devoid of life. Inside of his mouth was a message. "He tried to come between you and me. He tried to ruin my fun, so I had to make him go away." Reading the letter sent a chill down my spine. To think he was so bent on getting back at me that he'd kill his only semblance of a friend was horrible. From there, I became more determined to stop Brunette from tormenting me and infecting the other apartment neighbors with the B-Key sickness. Researching the cases involving the black-eyed kids was tenuous at best because most of them consisted of the same basic rhetoric. These entities knocking on people's doors or car windows and demanding entry only to become enraged when they are denied. No case resembled mine in the slightest. I then decided to look up good luck charms that could act as a barrier against Brunette. Part 3. I visited a shaman outside of my town who told me that he was very familiar with beings like Brunette. He stated that he saw them every time he went into a trance induced by a cocktail of hallucinogens. Despite my devotion to not being a drug user, I was desperate to try anything to rid myself of the Beck sickness. I took a deep whiff of the drug, and before I even knew it, I was walking on a path that was unwinding. I trudged forward endlessly until I saw Brunette standing there in his typically lifeless stance. His head was bowed, but he sensed that I was there. "You finally came to play with me?" he said in that same dull, monotonous voice. "After tormenting me for weeks, killing my roommate and his dog, your own friend, and then cursing me, all I want to know is what you are." Brunette casually brushed my request aside. He walked closer to me and readied his hand. Like the first time we met, he had a look of hunger on his face. Whatever it was made clear that what was motivating Brunette was to feed on my soul. He was back to his olive skin tone and skinnier than I remembered. Did he really decide that playing with me was more important than acquiring sustenance? Whatever the motivation, I grabbed his arm and clamped down on it. "Let me go," Brunette hissed. I refused and applied more pressure to his arm. His bones were surprisingly fragile, no doubt from not harvesting souls for a long time. He wiggled around under my hand, certainly feeling the bones in his hand breaking like twigs. I took my other hand and I hit him with it. Before I could strike him again, he hypnotized me with his eyes. I felt myself slipping into a dark abyss with my strength weakening. "That was no fair," Brunette muttered. "No fair." There I was sprawled on my back looking up at the black-eyed boy. He bent down to my face and a smile flared. His lips formed into an O shape which he forcefully began to inhale air. Vapor escaped my open mouth and entered his. My soul was rejuvenating him once more, his skin regaining a healthy peachy hue. My body grew weaker. If I didn't do anything, Brunette would leave me as a hollow husk and continue to ensnare and terrorize more innocent victims. With the last of my strength, I shot my hand out and seized him by his lips. He immediately knew what I was trying to do and doubled down on me. I fought back, pushing his face away from mine. Brunette groaned in pain and his chest began to descend. I took that opportunity to hit him in his ribcage a couple of times until he was forced to let me go. Purple blood was seeping out of his mouth in a wheeze. He looked up at me like I was the most disgusting thing in the room. "You'll die in here, you know," he smirked, "like your buddy and his dog and all the others." He laughed in a haze. I was becoming more enraged by the minute. I wasn't willing to give this little brat any more of my time. With one more punch, I directly hit Brunette in his demonic face, and he was sent off the path. The path acted as a bridge between the conscious and subconscious world. Underneath was a heavy mist. I wasn't even sure if it led to anywhere in particular. Brunette plummeted off the path, disappearing into the mist. His small frame fluttered in the wind and vanished into the mist. I woke up from my trance not too long afterward. Part 4. I never saw Brunette again. I couldn't even begin to explain to anyone else what happened, let alone that there was a head of a black-eyed boy in my cupboard, which also mysteriously disappeared. But with his disappearance, my curse began to vanish. It didn't disappear overnight, mind you, but nevertheless the BK sickness ended, and no one else in my apartment was struck with an incurable disease. But with Brunette, I could never be too careful. While I hoped that he was still falling, I investigated collecting good luck charms of any kind to prevent him from returning. I have also acquired a new job, and I saw to it that I only worked during the day shift. With my suspicions that Brunette was still watching me somewhere out there and waiting for his next move, I could never be too careful. The first time Sasha got high, she stood face to face with a black bear in the backyard of her friend's house. She was giggling while her two best friends Jade and Colt stood behind her, absolutely terrified. She wasn't sure why this was her reaction, or what other drug those edible gummy bears were laced with, but the bear looked adorable standing on its hind legs and raising its snout into the air. "Don't scream," Sasha said, still giggling. "It will only provoke it. Where I grew up, we had bears in our woods all the time. If you don't move, it will go away eventually." "You're out of your fucking mind," Colt snapped in a harsh whisper. "Honey, I don't think that's how it works," Jade said, her voice trembling. She was frantically searching through her phone. "You're really high right now. I think you should do as this website says and back away slowly, or scream if it comes close and throw things." "Scream and throw things at that?" Colt snapped in an even harsher whisper. "We should call animal control, and you shouldn't have come out here in the first place." "Colt, she's super out of it. Be nice," Jade tried to reason, still shaking. "Honey, try to back away slowly. Colt, call animal control and the police. Maybe pick up something to throw at it." Colt, shaking his head, muttered a string of swears under his breath. The bear looked absolutely massive compared to the 5-foot Sasha, especially on its hind legs. For some reason, though, the furry black beast didn't seem threatening, as it wasn't even looking at the threesome. It was more interested in an injured bat that was flopping around on the solar-tiled roof of Jade's house. Sasha remembered only bits and pieces of her father's advice from long ago. "You guys need to calm down," Sasha insisted, not even trying to suppress the giggling. "You see something on the roof, boy? What is it?" "It's not a dog, Sasha," Jade said. "Back away. Colt, you need to call animal control now." Sasha turned around and crossed her arms, not bothering to read her friend's expressions. "You guys act like you haven't seen a bear before. Good God. It's going back, it's..." By the time Jade pointed in the direction of the bear, it had slipped into the narrow opening of the woods. As Colt and Jade breathed a sigh of relief, Sasha sat on the porch steps and reclined on them, her eyes fixed on the ever-blurring, starry sky. There wasn't much she loved about Winstead, but she loved nights like this, even when she was drifting into a drug-induced sleep. "That was way too fucking close," Colt snapped. Sasha wasn't sure whether either of them were looking at her, but Colt's angry tone mixed with Jade's concerned tone weren't enough to sway her from her sleep. "Maybe we should just leave her there," Colt remarked. "She loves the wilderness, apparently." "Colt, come on, I don't want to hear the excuse that she's high again. She's the one that ate 10 of those gummies. I feel bad that she's having trouble with Jordan again or whatever, but she made an ass out of herself tonight." "I can hear what you're saying and I don't care," Sasha remarked. "You can leave me out here tonight." Jade laughed. "No way, honey. If the bear comes back, the trail cam will get it. There's plenty of them in Winstead. You're not missing much." "We're lucky to be alive," Colt said, ignoring Sasha's head shaking. "Let's go inside and go to bed. Maybe when you wake up, you'll sound like the more rational one again and stop sounding like your boyfriend." That remark particularly bothered Sasha, but she said nothing as Colt and Jade led her inside the dismal home Jade had rented out in the outskirts of Winstead, Connecticut. Even with the solar tiles the landlord fixed on the roof, the place was still a dump in Sasha's opinion, with mold stains all over the ceiling, boarded-up windows, and a total lack of air conditioning. It didn't help that Colt was secretly living there and leaving garbage in every room. By the time Sasha stepped inside the dark guest room, the only room untouched by either of them, she was relieved. She was happy to lay down on the single olive-colored couch that fit snugly between two stocked bookshelves. Sasha took the night to sober up, tossing and turning on barren cushions with broken springs. She couldn't stop thinking about how human the bear looked, standing on its hind legs. She found nothing to fear about the bear, but thought about it in wonder. When Sasha was little, she remembered her mom telling stories about the brown bears in the forests of Syria that greeted her as she walked through the woods and rubbed against her dress. Her father, a lifelong New Englander, tried to explain in extreme caution that this wasn't a typical experience. Sasha didn't listen, nor did she fear bears. She always loved bears, and still had the same sweatshirt of a brown bear from the time she was a teenager. High or not, she figured she probably would have approached the bear anyway. "I didn't know being high could make you the crocodile hunter." "Jesus Christ," she heard Colt say from the other room. "Sasha's always been good with animals," Jade responded. With a tired laugh, she turned on the faucet in the kitchen. To Sasha, they sounded louder and closer than they actually were. She was starting to drift when Jade continued. "That bear was absolutely crazy, though." "You mean terrifying," Colt interjected, pouring what sounded like a glass of water. "High or not, that girl has no common sense and is turning more and more into her boyfriend every day." Sasha sighed. Ever since Jordan came into the picture, neither Colt nor Jade were a fan of him or his YouTube channel about abandoned and scary places. For the longest time it was just Sasha, Colt, and Jade, three friends who met their freshman year at Northwestern Connecticut State University, a college not too far from the dump her friends now called home. Her relationship was driving a wedge between them. Being high tonight was a way to take the edge off their complaining. If she wasn't so tired, she would have climbed out the window and went looking for that unusual bear. Hours later, when her friends were sound asleep and Sasha was still up and tormented by her thoughts, she saw a figure from the window. It looked tall like the bear, but much blurrier. It was just standing in the middle of the yard. Despite squinting, she couldn't quite make out what it was. It was dark like the bear, but there weren't any discernible features like fur or ears. When she squinted harder, she saw a tall, gray-haired man just standing in the middle of the yard. He wore a long, open jean jacket over a flannel shirt and brown cargo jeans. When she saw his right hand gripping a metal shovel, she gulped and felt her heart sink deep into her chest. Without thinking, Sasha grabbed her cell phone and opened the window, shouting, "What are you doing here?" Those words startled the man. His big gray eyes widened and he darted off into the forest. When he ran, his body looked dark and blurry for some reason. Sasha figured she must still be high, but was sober enough to go into the living room where Colt and Jade were dozing on separate couches. "Guys, wake up. I saw something." Colt and Jade were in their clothes from the night before. Only Jade's oversized hoodie and Colt's cardigan had some sort of food stain on it. When they opened their eyes, Colt gave Sasha a grimace, and for Jade, furrowed eyebrows. "What is it, Sash?" "I saw a man in the backyard, a tall man with long hair." As she spoke, Sasha still had a sinking feeling in her chest. It took a moment for her two friends to process what she said, but once it hit them, they were both off the couch and at attention. "I called to him from the window and he ran away." "Colt, check the trail cam," Jade said. He nodded. "That's crazy, Sash. My neighbors saw a crazy man in their yard a couple weeks ago but said the cops did nothing. The trail cam will definitely pick something up." From a brown knapsack next to the couch, Colt pulled out his laptop and opened up the trail cam application on the desktop screen. They sat back down on the couch and watched Colt fast forward through hours of nothing. When the image of the three of them and the bear came on the screen, Sasha felt the urge to giggle, but Colt's look of exasperation convinced her otherwise. "About what time was this?" Colt asked, scratching his chin. Before Sasha could answer, Colt paused on a frame of the bear on its hind legs. "Sash, I thought you said you saw a man." "I did," she exclaimed, "this very tall man with ridiculously long hair and a jean jacket." "Maybe you need to fast forward a little more. Wait, slow down." Colt nodded and pressed the gray button with the single black arrow. It was the same bear they saw, just standing on its hind legs for what clocked at a solid 2 minutes. Then, it appeared to look at the window for a split second before getting back down on all fours and darting into the woods. Sasha's mouth dropped open and she took a step back. Jade sighed and Colt slapped his hand over his face. "Well, that's that, Sash," Colt snarled. "You were so high you thought the bear was some mystical jean jacket, dude. That's a bad trip." I know what I saw. Fast forward. Please fast forward. Oh, Sash, Jade said in a soft voice. You had a really bad trip. I'm so sorry it scared you. No! Sasha was rapidly shaking her head. I know what I saw. Fast forward. Wasn't this like 5 minutes ago? If I fast forward, there's nothing. Just a reminder that it's 4 in the morning and you're still really high. I've been high before, but not enough to hallucinate. It's like these were peyote gummies or something, or maybe you're just crazy. Jade smacked him on the ear. Ouch. What the fuck? I was kidding. Maybe we all just need to go to bed. Knowing that she couldn't convince them otherwise, Sasha had gone to bed. She wasn't having a bad trip, but a bad time. Now not only did her best friends disapprove of her relationship, but questioned her sanity. Unlike her boyfriend, Sasha wasn't religious or spiritual and didn't really believe in the supernatural. She also knew the difference between tripping and being sober, or at least she thought she did. What she saw wasn't caught on camera, but without any evidence, she still believed. Being in the last year of her biology graduate program, the notion of believing was deeply unsettling for her. Despite her better instincts, Sasha called Jordan the next day and told her about this experience. So let's review, Jordan said in a familiar, most self-assured voice that made Sasha groan. She didn't have to be there to know that he was grinning and pointing a finger in the air as if he had some brilliant idea. The three of you saw a bear in Jade's backyard that was standing on its hind legs. Later on in the night, you saw a tall, long-haired man that looked like a sage or something, and the trail camera caught footage of a bear. Yes, Sasha said, uncertain or where this was going but not wanting to know. And Jade lives in Winstead toward the woods. You know this, Jordan. What's your point? There was a brief pause before Jordan blurted out, You had a visit from the Winstead Wild Man. Oh God, Sasha groaned into the receiver. Like their high sports team mascots. No, that's the Winstead Wild Men. There's a slight difference. See, they get their name from the local legend of the Winstead Wild Man. It's like Connecticut's Bigfoot. As Sasha sank into the couch and let out another audible groan, she felt tempted to hang up and make an excuse about bad service as he continued. Matt Drake did a video about this. You should watch it. Okay, so legend has it that sometime in the late 1800s, there was this real proper selectman named Riley Smith, who was picking berries with his dog. For some reason he, like all men back then, always wore a suit and a top hat, even on a walk in the woods, but that's besides the point. Anyway, he saw a large creature that looked like a man but with black fur all over its body and long hair draped over its shoulders. The selectman and his dog were paralyzed with fear and stood motionless until the creature disappeared. He reported this story to the Winstead Herald, and over the next few weeks, many locals reported sightings and the town panicked. That's actually an interesting story, Sasha said, scrunching her nose. But I very much doubt that's what I saw. You believe in all this supernatural stuff? I respect that, I do. But how else can you explain it? Look, Sash, I got to go, unfortunately. Be careful out there and maybe buy bear spray or something. Sasha sighed. She loved her boyfriend, but not the way he looked for the supernatural in everything. For a while, they had a YouTube channel where they explored abandoned places together. Ever since he met Matt Drake, however, he dragged Sasha on ghost hunts and cryptozoology searches around the state for creatures with weird names like the Gloacus and the Black Dog of Hanging Hills. Something about the Winstead Wild Man intrigued her, though. At the very least, she found it strange that the camera footage picked up a bear and not the mystical-looking figure she saw. Maybe she was tripping. She'd accept that explanation before Jordan's. That morning, Sasha considered searching the Winstead Wild Man on her phone, but she had no signal. Neither Colt for Jade had paid for the internet that month. They left a note on the counter that they had gone off grocery shopping, a typical Sunday morning for them. She started her Sunday morning walk into town. She found herself peering into each neighbor's backyard in search of the long-haired man or the bear. Every time she thought she saw something, It just turned out to be a shadow from the vast forest that surrounded the town, or another animal like a moose or a deer. She searched the town high and low for the man until the bells sounded from a church downtown. She felt her mind and eyes growing dreary as she aimlessly wandered until she reached a part of town that she did not recognize, lined with old brick factory buildings. The street was completely silent. The sound of passing traffic, birds, and the crunch of fallen leaves beneath her feet had completely dissipated. The silence made her drowsy, so drowsy that she sat on the curb in front of a large brick building that looked different from the rest of the factory buildings, as if it was once a school or a town hall. The silence not only made her drowsy, but a mix of queasiness and extreme sadness. It became so silent that she thought of screaming just to make sure she could still hear herself. When she was ready to open her mouth and do so, she heard the sound of something scraping against the earth. Sasha turned around, knowing what she would see before she saw it. Those feelings of queasiness and sadness turned to absolute dread when she saw the long-haired man with the open jean jacket digging into the earth. "What are you doing? Who are you?" Sasha thought she whispered this, but the atmosphere was so quiet that the man not only turned around, but he brushed his hair out of his immense gray eyes and placed his shovel down. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to bother you." "I'm looking for my friends," the man said in a sharp, raspy voice. "Oh God," Sasha whispered to herself. "I should go. I'm so sorry." Sasha couldn't turn around though. She was encapsulated by the deepness of the man's gray eyes. "I've been looking for them for so long." His voice morphed into an echo that continued as he picked up his shovel and continued to dig. "What are you hoping to find?" Sasha felt her voice growing even smaller as she asked this, already knowing the answer. "Where they buried my friends. I've been looking for so long." His voice echoed once more against the quietness of the atmosphere. The man wasn't looking at her. He was digging so intensely that she thought he would break the shovel's blade. "I have to find them." "Who buried them?" She almost couldn't believe she asked this. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. "What is this place?" The man continued on as if he didn't hear her, throwing dirt every which way, causing Sasha to step back a few paces, but she was still unable to scream or run away. "Owiskala Ale Hall." The man's voice boomed and he dug more intensely, and the words echoed once more. "Owiskala Ale Hall." She could see the veins pulsating in his arms as he dug so deep into the earth that he created an opening big enough to be buried within. The man groaned and staked the shovel into the ground, turning around fiercely to meet Sasha's eyes. "I've been looking for so long, ever since I went here." "Where's here?" "Johnson Indian Reform School," he said gruffly. Those words cut like a knife as she felt a sharp pain in her head followed by bright flashes. Sasha was overwhelmed by images of bare, dark-skinned children walking in straight lines and a dark-robed nun behind them with a whip. She saw images of the long-haired man as a young boy with the same shovel, digging into the earth and weeping loudly. Sasha saw the black bear standing on his hind legs and roaring into the sky. Then, there was nothing but silence and complete darkness. When darkness was gone, she woke up on the curb of a completely different street that she now recognized. Sasha rose and looked around frantically to see a street filled with Sunday morning drivers and churchgoers. The buildings were gone. The silence was gone. The long-haired man was gone too. Now, even the slow sounds on Sunday morning in Winsted felt overwhelming. Just looking at the church made her queasy. Either she wasn't well or everyone around her was willfully ignorant of the horrific history that lurked within the town. Sasha wasn't sure what was worse, so she went back to Jade and Colt's house, too fright-stricken to look in any backyard or take any shortcuts. "We tried calling you," Jade exclaimed as a pale-faced Sasha stumbled into the house. She threw her arms around Sasha and pulled her in tightly. "You need to learn to charge your phone, Sash." "Yeah," Sasha murmured. Even Colt looked concerned and was reading something on his phone. "Looks like you did see something last night, Sash." He handed her his phone. It was a silver alert text about a man named Tayan Morgan, who had wandered from a retirement facility 24 hours ago. It described him as 6'5" with long silver hair. Sasha bit her lip, her hand shaking against her jeans. "I think you saw this guy. I'm not sure what he was doing in our backyard, but he's exactly how you described him. He is..." Those words were all Sasha could manage to say as she sat on the couch. Colt and Jade suggested reporting what she saw to the local authorities. All she could do was nod. She felt too frightened to express what she had seen, or to even rationalize it, even to Jordan, who would believe her at the drop of the hat. It wasn't until days later, when Sasha was back home, that she mustered the willpower to search for Johnson Indian Reform School. To her surprise and disappointment, she found the Foreign Mission School in Cornwall and the Moores Indian Charity School in Lebanon, but no combination of words matched Johnson Indian Reform School. Perhaps the man she saw attended one of those schools, or was just old and confused. Perhaps she felt such an intense connection to him that she imagined what he once saw. Perhaps it was just an old man with dementia who mixed up stories from other family members or legends. Sasha searched as intensely as she saw the long-haired man digging that day, but no results rendered. Perhaps it was best to just try and forget the disturbing images she saw and heard. No matter how hard she tried, Sasha couldn't forget about Tayan Morgan, the Johnson Indian Reform School, or anything else she had seen. She stayed over at Colt and Jade's place as an excuse to search the neighborhoods for the man or the street with the old factory buildings. The trouble was, Winstead had many streets with old factory buildings, but none that were shaped like old schools or town halls. Colt and Jade asked where she would go on her walks, but she never said. Every time she tried, she heard Tayan Morgan's echoing words, "I'm looking for my friends." Sometimes she felt the urge to help him. One time the urge was so strong that she wanted to call the retirement facility and ask for him by name, but something stopped her. His name, his story, his figure felt too real and unreal simultaneously to make any contact. One night at Colt and Jade's, many months after her first encounter, she sat on their back porch, chewing an inordinate amount of gummies to their chagrin. It was the first time Sasha was able to laugh and smile in a long time, but this time, Colt and Jade knew they couldn't stop her and just settled for the fact that she was happy and silly enough to joke around again. It was nice to join in on the silly conversations and make fun of Jordan and his crazy ghost adventures together. They were so busy sharing gummies and staring at the stars that they hadn't even noticed the black bear that had stumbled into their backyard, this time on all fours. "Oh my God," Colt said, tensing up and whispering sharply. "Sasha, be real quiet and don't do anything." "Yeah, Sash," Jade said, grabbing onto her shoulders. "Please don't do anything stupid. Hey, what's that in its mouth?" The bear had something white and pointy in his mouth that was rounded at its ends. Sasha's jovial mood turned into one of complete silence as she stared at the pointy figure and into the bear's gray eyes. She hadn't looked into the bear's eyes the first time she saw it. Now, Sasha sat quietly until the bear seemed to nod at them and slipped into the narrow opening of the woods. After it left, and after what seemed like an eternity of silence, Sasha said in a hushed tone, "I think he found his friends."